Christmas dinner. My father's face turned crimson as he pointed at the door and screamed two words that would change everything. "Get out!" The crystal champagne flutes went silent. 20 guests froze mid-conversation. My mother looked at the floor. My sister Emily stood by the fireplace with the faintest smile on her lips. Not shock, not sadness, but satisfaction. I was being expelled from my own family's Christmas party, and I had no idea why. But here's what they didn't know. While they saw me as the disappointing older daughter who moved away and never made anything of herself, I was actually living a life they couldn't even imagine. The next morning, less than 12 hours after my father threw me out like garbage, I did something that would shatter their entire world. I signed the deed to a $12 million oceanfront estate, paid in full, cash. And when the news hit our small town the following week, my family's phone started ringing off the hook. Because suddenly, everyone knew the truth about who I really was and what I really controlled. What my family did to me that Christmas wasn't just cruel, it was calculated. A plan months in the making. And my own little sister. She wasn't the innocent victim they'd always protected. She was the mastermind. But they made one catastrophic mistake. They underestimated exactly how much power I had, and when I discovered what they'd been doing behind my back, the lies, the manipulation, the betrayal that went so much deeper than I ever imagined, I didn't just get even. I changed the rules of the game entirely. This is the story of how one family dinner destroyed everything they had and gave me everything I'd ever wanted. Stay with me, because what happens next, they never saw it coming. My name is Danielle Shaw. I'm 37 years old, and for the past 12 years, I've lived a life my family knows almost nothing about. To them, I'm the daughter who moved to Seattle after college, the one who does something with computers and never quite lived up to their expectations. They don't ask many questions, and I don't volunteer answers. It's easier that way, safer. The truth is far more complicated than they could ever imagine. I drove 8 hours through December snow to make it to my parents' house for Christmas. I always come home for the holidays, even though every year it gets harder to pretend we're a normal family, even though every visit reminds me why I left in the first place. But this year felt different from the moment I pulled into the driveway. The house looked almost unrecognizable. The entire front had been repainted in a sophisticated charcoal gray with crisp white trim. New landscape lighting illuminated the walkway. Through the windows, I could see a massive Christmas tree that must have cost a fortune, decorated with the kind of ornaments you see in luxury home magazines, not the handmade felt reindeer we'd grown up with. My parents were retired on a modest, fixed income. This level of renovation wasn't just unusual, it was impossible. When I walked through the front door, the smell of catered food hit me immediately. Not Mom's traditional honey-glazed ham, but prime rib from an upscale restaurant 30 miles away. I recognized the distinctive packaging in the kitchen. The house was full of guests, maybe 20 people milling around with crystal champagne flutes that definitely hadn't been in the family china cabinet before. Everything gleamed under new recessed lighting in the ceiling. My mother greeted me with a hug that felt stiff, almost mechanical. Her hands were trembling when she pulled away. "Danielle, you made it. How was the drive?" She wouldn't quite meet my eyes. Long but fine. "Mom, the house looks incredible. When did you do all this?" She blinked rapidly, that nervous tell she's had since I was a child. "Oh, just some updates. Nothing major. Let me get you some wine." She practically fled toward the kitchen. My father appeared at my elbow, booming with forced cheerfulness. "Danny girl, Merry Christmas." He was trying too hard. His smile stretched too wide, his laughter at his own jokes just a beat too loud. Dad had never been good at hiding when something was wrong. I'd learned to read his moods before I learned to read books. My younger sister Emily stood by the fireplace, her phone clutched in one hand. She was 32 now, still beautiful in that effortless way that had always come so easily to her. But tonight she looked tense, her thumb scrolling compulsively across the screen, her eyes darting toward the door every few minutes. When she saw me watching, she quickly pocketed the phone and came over for a hug. "Hey, stranger," she said. Her embrace was brief, perfunctory. "Hey, yourself. This party is really something. Very fancy." Something flickered across her face. "Yeah, well, we all decided it was time to go all out this year." The way she said "we all" bothered me, as if decisions had been made collectively, without me. I moved through the party making small talk with neighbors and Dad's former coworkers, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching a performance. Everyone was just slightly off, like actors who hadn't quite memorized their lines, and they were all watching me when they thought I wasn't looking. I needed a moment to breathe, so I excused myself to the kitchen for water. The caterers had left their serving station unattended during a lull. That's when I saw it partially hidden under a pile of mail on the counter. A cream-colored envelope with a corporate logo. I shouldn't have looked. I knew that even as my hand reached for it. But something about that logo pulled at me, familiar and wrong at the same time. The invoice inside made my blood run cold. Millstone Capital Partners, my direct competitor in the logistics industry. The company that had been aggressively trying to undercut my expansion into the Midwest for the past 6 months. And there, in black and white, $250,000 for community consultation services. My eyes scanned down to the signature line. Not my father's cramped handwriting, not my mother's flowing script. Emily Shaw, principal consultant. My little sister, who had never held a job for longer than 18 months. Who still called Dad asking for rent money. Who claimed she was exploring opportunities whenever anyone asked what she did for work. Her signature on this invoice was confident, practiced, professional. The services listed made my stomach turn: community liaison services, regional stakeholder coordination, competitive market analysis, and strategic consulting. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and photographed the document. The date was 3 weeks ago. A handwritten note in the margin read, "Second installment due upon contract execution." When I looked up, Emily was standing in the doorway watching me. Our eyes met across the kitchen. I waited for guilt, for panic, for some kind of explanation. Instead, I saw something that chilled me more than the betrayal itself. She looked calculating, like she was doing math in her head, like she was deciding her next move. I put the invoice back exactly where I'd found it and walked past her without a word. My heart was hammering so hard I could barely hear the Christmas music playing in the living room. For the rest of the evening, I watched my family with new eyes. I saw Emily whisper something to Dad near the hallway. His response was too low to hear, but her words carried just enough. "Just get through today. Don't let her start asking questions." When the party began winding down and only close family remained, I did what I'd done every Christmas for the past 10 years. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. "Dad just sent me the receipts for the party. This must have been expensive. I'm happy to split the cost with you and Emily." The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. My father's face turned crimson. "Get out!" The words were so loud that my mother dropped the plate she was holding. It shattered on the hardwood floor. "We don't need your money. We don't need you coming in here judging us, looking down at us with your fancy Seattle life." I stood there frozen. In 37 years, my father had never spoken to me like that. Never. My mother was crying, but she didn't say a word in my defense. She just stared at the broken plate at her feet. The remaining guests gathered their coats in uncomfortable silence and fled. Nobody met my eyes as they left but Emily. Emily stood by the fireplace with her arms crossed, and on her face was the faintest smile. Not surprise, not distress, satisfaction. I collected my coat with shaking hands. As I reached the door, I heard her voice soft but perfectly clear in the sudden quiet. "I told you it would work." I drove away from that house knowing with absolute certainty that I hadn't just been expelled from a family gathering. I'd been deliberately removed. And my little sister had been counting on this moment for a very long time. I wasn't just unwanted, I was dangerous, and Emily had been planning this. I drove through the night, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight, my knuckles went white. 8 hours back to Seattle, the highway stretching endlessly under a black sky, and my mind wouldn't stop spinning. By the time I pulled into my building's underground garage, dawn was breaking over Puget Sound. My penthouse apartment occupies the entire 42nd floor of a downtown high-rise. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlook Elliott Bay. The furnishings are understated but expensive. Everything my family believes about my life is based on carefully constructed half-truths. They think I do well for myself, comfortable, maybe even successful in a modest, boring way. They have no idea. What my family doesn't know, what almost no one outside my inner circle knows, is that I am the founder and CEO of Shaw Global Transport. We're a $120 million logistics empire controlling 60% of the Midwest transportation market. I employ 2,400 people across 6 states. My personal net worth is $45 million, and I built every bit of it from absolutely nothing. 12 years ago, I left home with $800 in a backpack. I worked 3 jobs while getting my MBA, sometimes sleeping in my car between shifts. I identified a critical gap in rural supply chain logistics and started with 1 leased truck and a small business loan. When the recession hit in 2008, I systematically acquired failing competitors at rock-bottom prices. By 30, I was a multimillionaire. By 35, I had transformed regional logistics. But I learned early that wealth attracts parasites. Family members who suddenly need rent money, investment opportunities, help with medical bills. So I disappeared behind a corporate structure. I conduct all business under my grandmother's maiden name, D. Shaw Miller. No press interviews, no public appearances, all dealings through my law firm. My photograph appears nowhere online. To the business world, I'm a ghost. To my family, I'm just Danielle who moved away and does something vague with technology. The irony that kept me awake all night was this. 8 months ago, Shaw Global opened a $15 million distribution facility just 30 miles from my hometown. We're now the largest employer in the entire county. My company's trucks drive past my parents' house every single day, and they never made the connection. At 7 in the morning, I called my head of corporate security and my personal attorney. I need you both here within the hour, and I need you to find out everything about my family's connection to Millstone Capital Partners. By noon, I had my answer, and it was so much worse than I'd imagined. My attorney, Marcus Chen, spread documents across my dining table with the grim expression of a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. Your sister hired a private investigator 6 months ago, right after the regional business journals announced Shaw Global's expansion into your home region. He handed me a thick file. Inside were surveillance photos of me entering my corporate office building, close-ups of my car's license plate, property records, tax documents, employment verification forms. The investigator had been thorough, frighteningly thorough. "Emily knows exactly who you are," Marcus said quietly. "She's known for at least 6 months. The next document made me physically ill. Email chains between Emily and Millstone Capital Partners going back 4 months. I read them in growing horror. Emily's initial pitch to Millstone: my sister is D. Shaw Miller, CEO of Shaw Global Transport. I have direct access to her. I can provide insider information about route planning, client lists, and expansion strategies. More importantly, I can organize community resistance to your competitors' presence in the region. I'm offering you something priceless, a family member on the inside." Millstone's response: "If you can prove this relationship and deliver actionable intelligence, we're prepared to pay $250,000 in consulting fees." There were more emails, dozens of them. Emily providing details about Shaw Global's operations that she must have pieced together from investigation and inference. Her communications were professional, strategic, calculated. This wasn't the flighty, unstable sister who couldn't hold a job. This was someone else entirely, someone I'd never met. But it was the last email in the chain that destroyed me completely. Marcus had highlighted it in yellow: Emily to Millstone executives. "Everyone has always said Danielle was the smart one, the successful one, the one who had it all figured out. Do you know what it's like to live in someone's shadow your entire life? To be the pretty one, the charming one, but never the capable one? Well, now I'm going to prove I'm smarter than she ever was. I'm going to take her money without her even knowing where it came from. I'm going to destroy her expansion deal while she still thinks I'm her struggling little sister who needs her big sister's sympathy. That's real intelligence, That's real power. I read those words 3 times. Each time they cut deeper. This wasn't about money. This wasn't about desperation or bad choices or being in over her head. This was about ego, about jealousy that had festered for decades, about a sister who had spent her entire adult life waiting for the perfect moment to prove she could beat me at something. And she'd almost succeeded. Marcus watched me read his expression somber. Danielle, your sister didn't just stumble into this. She researched you. She identified your competitor. She built a value proposition. She negotiated a contract. This was premeditated corporate espionage wrapped in family betrayal. I set down the emails with hands that were perfectly steady now. The hurt was still there burning in my chest, but underneath it something colder and harder was taking shape. My little sister didn't stumble into betrayal. She hunted me, studied me, and built a trap, and I'd walked right in. The morning after I learned the truth about Emily's betrayal, I did something I'd been planning for months but had kept delaying. I called my real estate agent and told her I was ready to close on the property we'd been negotiating since October. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, I was sitting in a lawyer's office on the Washington coast signing the final documents for a $12 million beachfront estate. The house sat on 3 acres of pristine oceanfront, all glass and steel, and unobstructed views of the Pacific. Massive floor-to-ceiling windows faced the winter ocean, where waves crashed against black rocks under a steel-gray sky. The architecture was aggressively modern, all clean lines and open space, the kind of design that made a statement without saying a word. I wasn't buying it to show off. I wasn't even sure I'd tell anyone about it right away. I was buying it because I needed a physical marker, something solid and permanent that said, this chapter of your life is over. They threw you away. You don't need them anymore. You never did. When the last signature was complete and the deed was officially in my name, I stood alone in the vast empty foyer, the sound of ocean wind howling outside. I took a single photograph with my phone. Just me and all that glass and sky and water, a reminder that I had built all of this alone with no family support, no inheritance, no safety net, just determination and intelligence and refusal to quit. They had dismissed me. Emily had hunted me. My father had screamed at me to get out, and I'd just bought a house worth more than they would earn in 10 lifetimes. I didn't post the photo anywhere. I saved it to a private folder on my phone labeled, Remember. Someday when the hurt wasn't quite so fresh, I'd look at it and feel only peace. But that day wasn't today. 3 days after I signed the papers, my phone started exploding with notifications. Text messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years, former classmates, old neighbors, my father's co-workers, all of them saying some variation of the same thing, is this really you? The Pacific Northwest Business Journal had published their weekly feature on notable regional real estate transactions. The headline read, Mystery CEO behind Shaw Global Transport revealed local native Danielle Shaw purchases $12 million coastal estate. They'd included a photograph from a rare company event 2 years ago where I'd been caught in the background of a group shot. Not a formal portrait, just enough to confirm my identity. The article went on to detail my company's meteoric rise, its current market dominance, and its recent expansion into my hometown region. It mentioned that Shaw Global had also been quietly acquiring distressed properties through debt restructuring, becoming a major economic force in rural communities across the Midwest. I watched my phone light up with incoming calls. I didn't answer any of them, but I could imagine exactly what was happening back in my hometown. The gossip would be spreading like wildfire. The quiet daughter who moved away had been secretly running an empire. The woman they'd dismissed was actually the most powerful person any of them had ever met. And most devastating of all for my family, the sister they'd betrayed was now their region's largest employer and biggest economic stakeholder. Emily's carefully constructed plan was unraveling in real time. If Millstone Capital saw that article, they'd know immediately that she'd been playing them. Her insider information had been worthless from the start. I'd never trusted her enough to tell her anything real, and now her $250,000 payday was built on sand. Marcus called me at 11 o'clock that night. I was still awake, sitting in my Seattle apartment, watching the city lights blur through windows streaked with rain. Danielle, I need you to see something. I'm sending over a file right now." The email arrived 30 seconds later. I opened it on my laptop, and my breath caught in my throat. During his background investigation into my family's finances, Marcus had uncovered something even I didn't know. 3 years ago, my father's small consulting business had failed catastrophically. Desperate and drowning in debt, he'd taken out a high-interest mortgage on the family home from a predatory lender specializing in distressed borrowers. That lender had eventually sold their entire portfolio of toxic mortgages to a larger financial company looking to acquire distressed debt at a discount. And that financial company had been purchased last year by a holding corporation that was buried 6 layers deep in LLC paperwork wholly owned by Shaw Global Transport. I'd approved the acquisition myself. It was part of a bulk purchase of 53 properties across 4 states, all identified in the paperwork by property ID numbers and LLC names, not actual addresses. I'd never reviewed the individual locations. Why would I? It was a routine investment in distressed debt, the kind of transaction my company made regularly. But one of those 53 properties was my parents' house. For the past 12 months, my mother and father had been making their mortgage payments to a subsidiary of my company. They had no idea. The payments came out of their account automatically processed by a third-party servicer deposited into accounts they'd never heard of. And according to Marcus's research, they were 2 months behind on those payments. Legally, Shaw Global Transport held the note on their home. Legally, I could initiate foreclosure proceedings. I could take the house they'd raised me in the house they'd just spent a fortune renovating with money they clearly didn't have. I closed my laptop and stared at my reflection in the dark window. The woman looking back at me was someone my family had never really known. Someone they'd underestimated so completely that they'd tried to sabotage her business while literally living in a house she owned. They thought they were playing me. They thought Emily's clever scheme would net them easy money, while I remained oblivious and distant, the disappointing daughter who'd moved away and never quite measured up. But I'd been holding the deed to their entire life and didn't even know it. I gave Marcus 72 hours to build the case. What he delivered was devastating. Shaw Global's legal team discovered that when Millstone Capital submitted their proposal to undercut our expansion, they'd included community support documentation that was entirely fabricated. 23 signatures from local business owners and residents, all supposedly endorsing Millstone's superior community-focused approach. My lawyers cross-referenced every single one. 16 were outright forgeries. The other 7 were real people who'd never heard of Millstone Capital and certainly hadn't signed anything. Emily had created the documents herself, forged the signatures, submitted them as genuine community backing. That wasn't just unethical business practice, that was fraud. Marcus presented the evidence to Millstone's legal department with a simple message: Shaw Global was invoking the material misrepresentation clause in our preliminary agreements. All contracts frozen immediately pending investigation. Additionally, our analysis showed that someone had provided Millstone with proprietary route planning information that matched our internal strategy documents almost word for word. That constituted potential violations of securities law and trade secret theft. We sent cease and desist letters to my entire family naming them as material witnesses in the investigation. Millstone's response was swift and brutal. They immediately blamed the Shaw family for the fraudulent documents, claiming they'd been deceived by local consultants who'd misrepresented their community connections. Emily's $250,000 contract was terminated for cause. They demanded return of all funds already paid. Within 48 hours, the entire deal had collapsed, and my family was facing potential legal action from both sides. Emily's phone number started showing up on my caller ID a dozen times a day, then my father's, then my mother's. I let every call go to voicemail. I deleted the messages without listening, but I wasn't done. The notice of default arrived at my parents' house via certified mail on a Thursday morning. It was a standard legal document, the kind that gets filed when borrowers fall behind on mortgage payments. It didn't initiate foreclosure immediately. That process takes months, requires court filings, offers multiple opportunities for resolution. But the notice itself became public record the moment it was filed. In a small town, public records might as well be front-page news. Within a week, everyone knew. The Shaw family, who'd just thrown that elaborate Christmas party in their renovated home, was 2 months behind on their mortgage, and the company holding their note was Shaw Global Transport. My company. The daughter they'd expelled from Christmas dinner effectively owned the roof over their heads. I watched from 3 states away as my phone continued to explode with messages I didn't read. Marcus reported that my father's retired friends had stopped inviting him to their weekly poker game. My mother had missed 2 consecutive church services, unable to face the whispers. Emily's brief career as a business consultant was destroyed before it even started. Nobody would hire someone who'd been implicated in corporate fraud against her own sister. They were desperate to talk to me, to explain, to make me understand. I maintained absolute silence. 3 weeks after the foreclosure notice became public, I hosted the annual gala for my foundation. I'd established it 2 years earlier to support women rebuilding their lives after leaving toxic family situations. The event was held at a waterfront venue in Olympia, elegant and well-publicized. Regional media always covered it. Local politicians attended. It was exactly the kind of high-profile gathering where people came to be seen. I wore a floor-length navy gown and stood at the podium to deliver my keynote speech. The room was full of donors, survivors, supporters, and standing awkwardly near the back entrance, conspicuously uninvited, but present anyway, were my parents and Emily. They'd driven 4 hours, clearly hoping that a public setting would force some kind of reconciliation, some opportunity to salvage their reputation by association with my success. I looked directly at them as I spoke. This foundation exists because I understand what it means to be diminished by the people who should lift you up. I know what it feels like when family treats you not as a person, but as a transaction, as something to be used. My voice was steady, clear. We celebrate women tonight who had the courage to walk away from toxicity, even when that toxicity wore a familiar face, even when it lived in the house they grew up in. True family doesn't manipulate. True family doesn't betray. And true family doesn't look at you and see only what they can take. The room had gone absolutely silent. Every eye in the place turned toward my parents and sister. My father's face drained of color. My mother looked at the floor. Emily stood frozen, her expression caught between humiliation and rage. They left before the speech was finished, walking out into the cold December night, while 300 people watched them go. The next morning, photos from the event appeared in both the regional business journal and the local hometown newspaper. The articles mentioned my family's attendance and abrupt departure. Combined with everything else already public knowledge, the story wrote itself. I'd destroyed their deal with Millstone. I'd exposed their financial desperation. And I'd humiliated them in front of everyone who mattered in their world. It should have felt like victory, like justice, like the ending I'd been working toward. But then my mother called at 2 a.m, and when I heard her voice, something in it made me answer. "Danielle, please. I need to tell you something Emily doesn't know I'm telling you. Something that changes everything." I'd destroyed their deal, exposed their debt, and humiliated them publicly. But then Mom called, and what she told me changed everything. My mother arrived at my beachfront estate 2 days later alone. I watched her walk from her car to my front door, and she looked like she'd aged 10 years in 3 weeks. Her hands trembled as I led her inside. We sat in my living room with the Pacific Ocean stretching out behind us through the glass, and she told me everything. 1 year ago, Emily had been cleaning out the attic, searching for old photo albums. She'd found a box hidden behind the insulation tucked away where no one was meant to look. Inside were letters 20 years old, written in my mother's handwriting. Love letters to my father's younger brother, Michael. Uncle Michael, who'd been Dad's best friend, his business partner, the person he'd trusted most in the world. The affair had lasted 6 months. Michael was planning to tell my father the truth when he died in a car accident on a rainy November night. He'd been driving to my parents' house. The investigation concluded he'd been speeding, lost control on a wet curve. But my mother had always wondered if he'd been distracted, agonized trying to figure out what to say. If my father learned about it now, it wouldn't just end the marriage. It would destroy his memory of his brother Poison, every good moment they'd shared, rewrite the story of his entire adult life. The letters proved the affair had been happening right up until Michael's death. There was no way to soften that truth. Emily had been holding this over my mother's head for a full year. At first it was small things. Can you talk to Dad about lending me money? Can you tell him I need help with rent again? But it escalated. Emily's demands grew bolder, more controlling. When Emily discovered who I really was 6 months ago, she'd woven my mother into her scheme, threatening to show Dad the letters if Mom didn't cooperate. "I didn't know she was targeting you," my mother whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Not until that Christmas party. I thought it was just some business opportunity she'd found. She said we'd all benefit from it. By the time I realized what she was doing, you were already being pushed out the door and I was too terrified to stop it." I sat very still, processing this. Emily hadn't just betrayed me. She'd been systematically manipulating our entire family for a year, using fear and secrets as weapons. She'd turned our mother into an accomplice through blackmail. She'd poisoned everything she touched. But she'd also given me clarity. 2 weeks later, I arranged a meeting at my lawyer's office. All of them came because they had no choice. My father, my mother, and Emily sitting across a conference table from me and Marcus. I laid out my terms with perfect calm. "You can stay in the house," I said, looking at my parents. "Shaw Global will restructure the mortgage at fair market rates, not a family favor, not a discount. You'll pay exactly what any other borrower would pay. If you keep up with payments, you keep the house." My father's eyes filled with tears. He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. "Emily, you're moving out immediately. I'm filing a civil lawsuit against you for fraud and tortious interference with business relations. It will be public record. Between that and everything else that's happened, I imagine you'll find it difficult to work in this region. That's not my problem. That's the consequence of your choices." Emily's face twisted with rage. "You self-righteous—" "I'm not finished," I said quietly. "If any of you want a relationship with me going forward, family therapy is mandatory, not negotiable, and all future contact happens on my terms at my discretion. I will decide if and when I'm ready to have you in my life." My father broke down completely, sobbing into his hands. "I'm so sorry, Danny. I'm so sorry I didn't see what was happening. I failed you." Mom signed the mortgage restructuring agreement with shaking hands, whispering apologies I wasn't sure I was ready to accept. Emily stood up, knocking her chair backward. "This is insane. You're all pathetic," she pointed at me. "You think you won? You're still the daughter nobody wanted. Money doesn't change that." I met her eyes. "No, Emily. I'm the daughter you needed and threw away. The difference is, I don't need you anymore, any of you. But if you want to be part of my life, you'll earn it. For the first time in your life, you'll actually earn something." She stormed out. I never saw her again. 6 months passed. I lived in my oceanfront mansion and ran my expanding empire. My foundation grew, helping 50 women leave toxic family situations and rebuild their lives with dignity. The work was fulfilling in ways I'd never expected. My mother called once a week asking if she could visit. Sometimes I said yes. We were learning to know each other again carefully, with clear boundaries and hard-won honesty. My father took a part-time job at a hardware store, finally accepting that his glory days were over, and that humble work had its own dignity. They attended therapy every week. Emily moved to Arizona, from what I heard through the small-town gossip network. She was still blaming everyone but herself, still insisting she'd been treated unfairly. One afternoon, a letter arrived. My mother's handwriting careful and deliberate. "I'm sorry I didn't protect you when you needed me. I'm proud of who you became despite us. You deserved better than we gave you." I stood in my foyer holding that letter, looking out at the Pacific Ocean stretching endlessly toward the horizon. I wasn't crying. I was smiling, because I finally understood something crucial. The ultimate revenge wasn't destroying them. It was building a life so beautiful they couldn't touch it. It was becoming so whole, so complete, so successful, that their opinions simply stopped mattering. That Christmas, they pushed me out thinking I was nothing. Now I'm everything they'll never be, and they're just people I used to know. Sometimes the family we're born into isn't the family we deserve, And sometimes the greatest gift they can give us is forcing us to walk away and build something better on our own. Looking back now, that Christmas dinner was the best thing that ever happened to me, not because the betrayal didn't hurt. It did, deeply. But because it finally freed me from the obligation to keep shrinking myself to fit into their small view of who I was supposed to be. My sister Emily spent her entire life resenting me for being the capable one, the smart one, the one who got away. But what she never understood was that capability wasn't something I was born with. It was something I built because I had to, because nobody was going to save me, because the only person I could truly count on was myself. My parents failed me in fundamental ways. They chose comfort over truth, avoiding conflict, instead of protecting their daughter. My father let his ego and his need to feel important blind him to what was really happening under his own roof. My mother let fear turn her into an accomplice. Those failures are real and they matter. But holding on to anger about them would have been like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. At some point you have to decide whether you want to carry that weight forever or set it down and walk into the rest of your life. I chose to walk forward, not because they deserved my forgiveness, but because I deserved my peace. Today, my foundation has helped hundreds of women leave toxic family situations and rebuild their lives with dignity and purpose. Every woman who walks through our doors and says, "I thought I was the problem," reminds me of who I used to be. The daughter who kept trying to earn love from people who saw her as a transaction. The sister who didn't realize she was being hunted until the trap had already closed. I get to tell them what I wish someone had told me 20 years ago. You are not the problem. You were never the problem. And the people who can't see your worth don't get to define your value. That's the real victory, not the mansion or the company or the millions in the bank. It's the freedom to wake up every morning and know that nobody can take away what you've built. Nobody can make you small again unless you let them. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated by your own family? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting yourself? What would you have done in my situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because I read every single one and your stories matter. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that you're stronger than the people who tried to diminish you, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Every week I share real stories about women who refused to stay broken, who built empires from ashes, who proved that the best revenge is a life well lived. You're not alone in this journey. We're building something powerful here, one story at a time. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And remember, the people who underestimate you are just giving you the element of surprise.